Welcome. This lecture is on Israel's first war. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion gathered with Jewish leaders and others at the Tel Aviv Museum and read the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel. While Ben-Gurion's reading the declaration was a momentous occasion, Jewish defenders of the new state had no time for celebration. They faced a daunting task as Arab nations put military might behind the violent rhetoric of destroying the Israeli people, who numbered less than 700,000. The day after the birth of Israel, the Secretary General of the Arab League promised the destruction of the Jewish state. This will be a war of extermination and a momentous massacre, which will be spoken of like the Mongolian massacres and the Crusades. End of quote. Formed in 1945, the Arab League consisted of Egypt, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Lebanon, Transjordan, and Yemen. And the immediate and serious problem for the new state of Israel were the attacks of the Egyptians, Syrians, Jordanese, Lebanese, and Iraqi, all adding to the Palestinian Arab fighters engaged in the previous 6 months of unofficial fighting. It was now a full-blown war, with many of the Israeli soldiers fatigued from the earlier months of fighting. The equipment and firepower of the 4 invading armies of May 15 were far stronger, and Jewish military leaders gave Israel a 50-50 chance of success. A major problem was weapons. Heavy weapons were rare, and only 60% of the Jewish troops had guns. Yitzhak Rabin, a future prime minister, remembered the sense of dread among the soldiers as they faced the perilous task of defending Israel. We were frail corks being used to stop up hundreds of holes in a leaky dam, that a flood of our enemies might be expected at any time to overwhelm and drown us. The situation remained harrowing because, quote, there was never enough of us, and so many had already been killed. As fast as we stopped one leak, we would be withdrawn and rush somewhere else to plug another. Representing the thoughts of many, Jewish resident Haggai Horvitz saw the Arab invasion as a continuation of the Holocaust. Quote, we, the Jews of the land of Israel, were meant to be annihilated. It was obvious that we were fighting for our very existence. If we did not win, we would be annihilated. And thus we fought. End of quote. Not generally reported in the Western press, many Arab fighters had entered Palestine months before May 15, and they controlled a number of strategic points. Surrounded by the Arabs, the besieged Jewish quarter of Jerusalem faced hardship for months as Arabs blocked roads in the area. The shelling of Jerusalem by King Abdullah's British-trained Arab Legion, known as the best army in the Arab world, began before the termination of the mandate. British officials reported the withdrawal of the Arab Legion from Palestine prior to May 15, but others knew otherwise. They saw the Jordanian troops in Gaza and Hebron. The commander of the Arab Legion himself wrote that most of his military units were in Palestine before the British departed. Other Arab troops, such as the Iraqis, were in the Arab city of Jaffa before mid-May. Consistently hostile to the Jews, King Farouk of Egypt committed his army to defeat the new Jewish states. Barak declared Arabs, males, quote, were keen to enter the fray as the shortest road to heaven, end of quote. Muhammad Mamun Shinawi of Egypt's Al-Azhar University stated, quote, the hour of jihad has struck. 100 of you will defeat 1,000 of the infidels. This is the hour in which Allah promised paradise, end of quote. Transjordan King Abdullah had a similar message for the Arab legionnaires. Quote, he who will be killed will be a martyr. I remind you of the jihad and the martyrdom of your great grandfathers. End of quote. Muslim mothers shouted to their sons, quote, God be with you, my son. Don't come back. Martyrdom, my son. The Arab invasion began hours after the British mandate ended. Later in the day, Ben-Gurion went on the radio to tell the people that the nation faced a titanic political and military struggle and a troubled and dangerous time. In his eyes, the earlier UN National Assembly vote to establish the State of Israel appeared forgotten. Israel could not count on the assistance of any of the nations who voted for a two-state solution. Ben-Gurion unified three fighting forces of the Haganah and smaller groups Irgun and the Stern Gang. The new force, the Israeli Defense Forces, consisted of approximately 50,000 soldiers. The IDF faced a Syrian, Lebanese, and Jordanian threat in the north and east, and an Egyptian threat in the south. The Israeli position in Jerusalem was precarious. Weeks before the official Arab invasion, Arabs cut off water supplies to the city. With rationing, daily food intake was as low as 500 calories per person. Weapons were scarce. To fool the Arabs, the Jews on one occasion in Jerusalem rushed their 3 Bren guns from one section to another. They also beat large tin cans to give the impression of more guns. One commentator claimed that the Jewish capture of one Arab district of Jerusalem with 2 Sten guns, 5 rifles, and 30 tin cans was like, quote, a repetition of Gideon's victory in Bible days. However, the attacking Arab forces made a major statement, targeting Israel's largest civilian center. Egypt bombarded Tel Aviv from the air for 6 straight days, and about 5,500 Egyptian troops attacked isolated Jewish settlements near and along the coast. Whereas one brigade of Syrian and Lebanese troops faced fierce Jewish resistance in the north, 6,500 Arab legionnaires and 2,700 Iraqi troops took control of the West Bank. By mid-July, troops from Yemen, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, and Sudan brought the total number of troops in Palestine to about 50,000. King Abdullah viewed the early stage of the war in a positive light, pretending to champion the Palestinian cause when in fact he sought to enlarge his kingdom by taking the West Bank. Neither the Jordanians nor the Egyptians viewed the Palestinian Arabs as a separate national group. In fact, most Palestinians lacked a clear sense of a national identity. Historians note that the Arab states were wary of one another's territorial ambitions in Palestine, resulting in poor coordination of military tactics. There was much Arab misinformation about the war. False news reports exaggerated or invented Arab military successes, which seemed reasonable to the many journalists who expected the Arabs to triumph militarily. Israel's most serious military threat was the Arab Legion, a highly mechanized army looking formidable in Nablus to the northwest, Ramallah to the west, and East Jerusalem. To the south of Jerusalem, several platoons of legionnaires, local fighters, Egyptian army troops, and Muslim Brotherhood fighters fought well. After fierce back and forth fighting, the Israelis won and thus were able to protect the Jerusalem-Bethlehem road. Eastern Jerusalem was another matter, as Israeli fighters tried to hold ground, in some cases with mostly teenage fighters. The Israelis lost the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem, unable to withstand the pounding of their position by the Arab Legion. There was also military failure to the west of Jerusalem, pinned down by Legion mortar, machine gun, and rifle fire in the first Latron battle. Lieutenant Ariel Sharon, a future prime minister, received serious wounds to his leg and stomach. He wrote, quote, "I felt something thud into my belly, knocking me back. I heard my mouth say, 'Mommy.' And the instant it was out, I glanced around to see if anyone had heard. Already blood was seeping through my shirt and from my shorts, where another wound in my thigh had appeared as if by magic." End of quote. The bullet had entered his stomach and exited his upper leg. The strange angle explained by the fact that the Jordanians fired down on the trapped Israelis. Sharon motioned for his badly injured men to silently retreat in the hope that the Arabs would not see them. Unable to walk, Sharon crawled to safety before passing out. Although unable to take Latron, the Israelis built the Burma Road, an alternate supply route to West Jerusalem, in full operation by June. The Israeli forces benefited with a steady supply of weapons from Czechoslovakia, arms that the IDF badly needed. From Egypt came deadly air attacks, Spitfires, and other aircraft hitting Tel Aviv. The main Egyptian army progressed north into the Gaza Strip, while a portion of the army split off to the northeast, occupying Beersheba, passing through Hebron, and reaching Bethlehem. The Egyptian presence in the Jerusalem region was due to Cairo's distrust of a complete takeover of the West Bank by the Jordanians. In the Bethlehem-Hebron area, quarreling between the Jordanians and Egyptians was common. They even bickered over the size of each other's flags flown in the respective towns they controlled. As for the western coastal region, the Israelis prevented the Egyptians from reaching Tel Aviv, but the price was high for many of the Israelis living in the various settlements, which became stubborn obstacles for the Arab forces. As for the Arab invasions of the north, participants included Iraqi soldiers numbering approximately 4,500 at the start. Even though their numbers eventually grew to 18,000 soldiers, they failed to reach Haifa. The Syrians had about 10,000 soldiers, of which 2,000 crossed into Palestine from the Golan Heights on May 15th, only to fall short in gaining a stronghold in the region south of the Sea of Galilee. Syria did, however, capture the northeast shoreline of Lake Tiberias and a portion of territory west of the Jordan River north of the lake. The goal of the Lebanese army, numbering 3,500 troops, was more modest, owing to the large number of Christians in Lebanon. After a month of fighting, all the Arab armies were short of their military objectives. The territories occupied by the Jordanians and the Iraqis west of the Jordan River and the Egyptians south of Jerusalem was land allotted to the Palestinian Arabs by the 1947 UN report. Israel retained most of its territory and conquered some land set aside for the Palestinian Arabs. What became a common narrative in the Arab world was that the Israelis were the aggressors seeking to expand their borders. Yusef el-Bandak, a Christian Arab, saw the actions of the Arabs as defensive. Following the British withdrawal, the Zionist forces swept across the country, spreading havoc and destruction among the unarmed Palestinian Christian and Muslim citizens. End of quote. The focus was on the Arabs defending their lands, homes, and historical rights against an alien invasion. The Arabs argued that Israel was a foreign occupier assisted by the imperialist forces, Britain first, followed by the United States. The first break in the war was due to the UN truce of June 11th to June 9. The UN appointed Count Folke Bernadotte of Sweden as a mediator, but neither the Israelis nor Arabs trusted the United Nations. At an Israeli cabinet meeting in mid-June, Foreign Minister Moshe Sharett declared that Israel should not surrender any land, quote, conquered in a struggle that was forced upon us, end of quote. The Security Council's truce and the provisions prohibiting the entrance of fighting personnel and war material into the region appeared to put the Israelis at a disadvantage to the Arabs who had stockpiles of weapons and who could recruit for their armed forces from the large in-country manpower reserves. However, the Israelis found a way to replenish their arms supplies with purchases from Eastern Bloc countries. The Soviets bypassed a United Nations Security Council embargo on arms to the Middle East by way of proxies such as Czechoslovakia. One reason for the Soviet Union's favoritism to Israel was its assessment that Israeli military success would lead to British withdrawal from the region. During the truce, Israel received from Czechoslovakia 75 fighter planes, Messerschmitts, and Spitfires, and thousands of rifles and machine guns. The Israelis also had the ability to manufacture some of their own weapons, an industry lacking among the Arabs. In acquiring weapons and reinforcing their military positions, both the Arabs and Israelis violated the truce. However, the Israelis gained the most. The Arabs' agreement to a truce was a miscalculation. When fighting renewed, Israel, with its strengthened air force, began to bomb Cairo, Amman, and Damascus. Operation Danny resulted in Israeli gains on the Central Front against the Arab Legion. In the north, Israeli forces defeated the Arab Liberation Army and captured much of Galilee and a large military camp at Sarafan. The IDF had success in the eastern and central theaters with the most important conquests in the regions of Galilee and Lydda Ramla, all carried out before the UN Security Council imposed a second truce on July 19, which ushered in a 3-month period of no major battles. In August, Count Folke Bernadotte presented his plans to solve the Arab-Israeli conflict. Israel was to repatriate Palestinian refugees, There was a revision of political borders. Israel would lose the Negev, but gain the Western Galilee. And the governing of Jerusalem was to be by an international body. Moshe Sheret saw the plan as a complete capitulation to Anglo-Arab pressure. And the Arabs rejected the plan for its lack of provisions for a Palestinian state and a stipulation that Arabs recognize and negotiate with Israel. Bernadotte submitted his unpopular plan to the UN on September the 16th. The following day, Jewish terrorists murdered him with an automatic pistol as he sat in one car of a three-car United Nations convoy. Outraged Israeli officials expressed remorse, but the arrest of 200 Stern gang members fell short of bringing the actual killers to justice. During the second truce, the Egyptian expeditionary force grew to 12,000, and the 3 Saudi Arabian battalions joined the mix. Of significant concern for Israeli leaders was Egyptian control of key areas of the Negev, a barren area lacking water, but nonetheless necessary for Israel's future settlement and security. When the Egyptians failed to honor the truce arrangements permitting Israel to send supplies south, the Israelis acted. In mid-October, they began Operation 10 Plagues, named after the afflictions of Egypt told in the book of Exodus, a plan that saw the Egyptians withdraw from much of the Negev. Important for the future development of Israel was the Gulf of Aqaba. The town of Eilat was the arrival and departure point for Israeli contact with Africa and Asia. The UN Security Council established a ceasefire for October 19, something the IDF was in no hurry to respect. But the Arabs were also defiant, obviously in the north when the Arab Liberation Army attacked the IDF west of the Hula Valley on October 22nd. The Israelis prevailed, and by the end of the month, the Arab Liberation Army retreated to Lebanon. In mid-November, the UN Security Council resolved to set up an armistice in which all parties directly involved in the war participate. But the Egyptians and other Arabs refused to end the negotiations with Israel. On December 22nd, Israel launched another campaign causing the complete Egyptian withdrawal from the Negev. Egyptian defeat in Palestine prompted a Muslim Brotherhood member to assassinate Egypt's Prime Minister Narashi Pasha in late December. Israeli forces also pushed deep into the Sinai Peninsula before being ordered back by Ben-Gurion because of British pressure. He took seriously the threat of intervention by the British, who were unhappy with the Israeli territorial acquisitions. Adding to this was the strong warning from President Harry Truman to withdraw. Ben-Gurion was unwilling to jeopardize good relations with the Americans. In the end, interventions by the United Nations and the British and the Americans prevented the Israeli destruction of the Egyptian army remaining in Palestine. With the exception of the Arab Legion in control of the West Bank, there were no Arab military forces in what once was Palestine. The Arabs withdrew behind their borders, waiting and planning another day to destroy Israel and gain territory. The Syrians and the Lebanese wanted the Western Galilee. The Egyptians wanted the Negev. The Jordanians wanted a corridor to the sea. Also, something had to be done to readdress the 1948 episode that the Arabs called the catastrophe, al-Nakba. It was difficult for many Arabs to comprehend Jewish success when many believed that the Arab military forces would prevail over the Jews. Even before May 15, some Arab political and military leaders had selected Tel Aviv homes of which they would take possession soon. A major issue in the wake of the war was the plight of the Palestinian Arab refugees. There is a wide disagreement of the number of Palestinian refugees for this period. A United Nations mediator counted 472,000, where others put the number in the 520,000 as high as 900,000 refugees. Immediately after the war, Arab leaders demanded the Israelis allow all refugees to return to their homes in land now part of Israel. Israeli leaders pointed out that it was the Arabs who denied a Palestinian state with their opposition to a two-state solution. It was significant that nearby Arab states were reluctant to absorb the refugees and that religious leaders opposed any return of refugees while Israel still existed. In August 1949, the Israelis did agree to the return of 100,000 refugees, but the Arab states rejected this offer. Approximately half of the Palestinian population were refugees, and they expected the combined Arab armies in the region to recover and gain and again wage war on Israel. But it was never clear if Arab states would allow Palestinian statehood. Even the neighboring Arabs viewed the Palestinian refugees as a security threat. Many Palestinian Arabs were in a sad state. Egypt refused to give citizenship, for example, to the 200,000 to 300,000 refugees living in the Gaza Strip. Some historians argue that Arab leaders were open to negotiate with Israeli leaders, but the Arab masses viewed the Jews with even greater hatred after the War of Independence. In the period December 1947 to 1948, Israel, with a population of approximately 650,000, lost close to 6,000 soldiers and civilians. Although Israel defended itself successfully and did prevent an Arab victory, the conflict concluded with no peace settlement. What followed were 4 armistice agreements in 1949. Israel signed with Egypt in February, with Lebanon in March, with Transjordan in April, and with Syria in July. For one serious journalist, the armistice agreements were a shameful mark to, quote, endure as long as that abominable state known as Israel remains within the heart of the Arab world. Thank you.